Hi there, I'm Carolyn Bradley. I'm a member of the Executive Committee of National Drama. This is my presentation as part of the Feast of Ideas for Drama and Theatre in School, presented by National Drama for the Aspire the Power of the Arts conference. So my topic to discuss with you today is about introducing students to live theatre, to give you some ways in, to give you some ideas for teaching live theatre, which as a drama teacher myself is one of my favourite topics to teach. So thinking first of all about why live theatre is so important. So as you'll know, if you're a secondary drama teacher, it is a vital part of the specification across all exam boards at GCSE and A-level. So it is part of the written exam. But it's so much more than that. It develops cultural capital, which is really important for our students right now. It allows students to develop their own creative ideas. So over and over again, what we see as teachers is that students who've experienced live theatre can then put those ideas into their own creative practical work. So it's a stimulus, it inspires and it develops imagination. It also encourages an opinion and a voice, and that's so important right now when our students have been off school, they've had that disruption to learning due to the pandemic, and so we want them to talk about their experiences. We want them to have an opinion, to have a response, and it gives young people a voice. And I think that is so important. There's nothing I love more than a group of students discussing a play that they've seen, whether they loved it or hated it, it doesn't matter. So there are more ways than ever now to access live theatre, and it doesn't have to be live in the traditional sense anymore. There's some just very simple ideas here on the screen, but you'll have, I'm sure, come up with these ideas yourselves during the pandemic as creative ways of accessing theatre. So we now have a lot of digital subscriptions on offer. So the National Theatre Collection, for example, Digital Theatre Plus, although that can be very expensive. There can be one-off digital packages if you research them. So a couple of examples here that I've used and I've purchased myself as a teacher: Pilot Theatre and Black Eyed Theatre, where they offer it's one show package. So you pay to access one theatre production, but normally that will come with a lot of digital resources, education packs, downloadable clips, interviews with the cast, crew and creatives, which can be brilliant resources for your teaching and really cut down on your planning. We've got DVDs obviously now, so the requirement for AQA originally was that the theatre productions had to be live, or you had to see at least one production live. That requirement has been removed, and also the removal of the requirement that the production had to be seen live within 5 years has been removed, and that opens up a lot more potential for theatre productions that we can access with our students. So some examples there of DVDs that you could purchase. I would encourage you as well to have a whole library and a catalogue of really high quality digital productions to show clips from, so our students are accessing as wide a range of theatre productions as possible. YouTube is a brilliant resource, or Vimeo is also a great resource. So some things I've used here, I use the National Theatre clips a lot on YouTube, the official clips, to show very short segments of scenes from productions. I've watched all the Gecko productions online and my students have loved those. And we also watch whatever's been on at the Royal Variety Show. So they often do musical numbers or extracts from plays for the Royal Variety, and they can provide you with a 5 to 10 minute clip, which could be ideal for a Key Stage 3 lesson. We know that nothing beats a live show, and something that we'll all be looking forward to as practitioners and teachers is getting back to live theatre. But it's just to make us aware that now there are more ways than ever to access theatre productions for our students. So it can be tricky, and I found this challenging as a secondary teacher to find age-appropriate material sometimes. So it can be hard to find full shows for Key Stage 3 which are age-appropriate and maybe don't have swearing or material that you might find inappropriate. You also might be challenged in terms of contact time with Year 7 and 8, because we know, very sadly and unfortunately, we're stuck sometimes with the amount of contact time we have at Key Stage 3. In some schools there is no Key Stage 3 drama, in some schools it's taught once a fortnight or on a performing arts rotation. If you're lucky you have it once a week, but it's still not maybe as much time as you have at Key Stage 4. So it can be useful just to start with really short clips of live theatre. So I use a lot of pantomime clips because pantomime is a brilliant way to introduce students to theatre, because it's something that they maybe culturally are already familiar with, so they recognise it, it's part of maybe their cultural context already. But they're also bright, they're fun, they're colourful, and they can be a really good way into analysing design work. As I said previously, the Royal Variety Show musical numbers can be a fantastic way of accessing some live theatre. The National Theatre official clips are often 1 to 2 minutes long, and there's a huge wealth of those available. And they can introduce your students to a really interesting and stimulating and dynamic piece of theatre in just a bite-sized chunk, which can be brilliant. A whole lesson can be built around 1 to 2 minutes of a theatre production, as long as you can provide the context. Within the National Theatre collection, though, there are a couple of productions I would recommend for Key Stage 3, and they are Treasure Island and Peter Pan, which work brilliantly, but it's just if you've got time to show a full-length production within the context of a scheme of work for Key Stage 3. So, just to cover now what I would say are some top tips for introducing and delivering live theatre in drama. So, start small is my first top tip. And what I mean by that, as I've said, is short clips are fine. You don't have to watch a full production. It maybe can be more beneficial if you have less contact time to watch shorter clips of a variety of different productions, so your students get a more experience of what theatre can be and can look like. I would focus on one element at a time. I always say there's 5 elements of live theatre: acting, lighting, sound, costume and set. And so it can be helpful to just start small and zoom in on one of those elements in a lesson. Give students specific things to look for. So for example, we're going to watch a clip from a pantomime and I would like you to be looking at the costumes. Or look at the costume of the dame and tell me how that communicates their character. Or we're going to just look at colour, all of the colour in the lighting, in the costumes, in the set, and I want you to write about the colour. It can be helpful to flip the learning maybe and teach the element that you want to explore first, because what that does is it builds up the vocabulary that's needed. Starting small can also just be responding with single words or phrases. I, as a strategy, always give out post-its the first time we watch something, and I ask for a post-it response. So you can have a post-it plenary at the end. And I just ask the students to jot down a few words on their post-it, so it structures their response if they're going to give that to me verbally, but it just helps them develop an opinion, which is really important. It can be really, really useful to watch something more than once as well, because if it's the first time students have watched something, I always want them not to write anything down. I use this 3-time rule. I say the first time we're going to watch it, don't write anything. The second time we're going to watch it, I want you to be describing what you can see. And the third time we're going to watch it, I want you to either pick out a quote, or I want you to be analysing, or I want you to be adding to your detail. So give them something to do each time, but think about watching a clip more than once. If you've got that ability to watch it digitally, this is. Okay, so my next tip is about generating vocabulary. So we need to teach the language that we want our students to use, because what we're talking about here is often what we call tier 3 vocabulary. It's that subject specific contextual vocabulary. If you are asking students to analyse lighting, they need to know the difference between an LED and a spotlight and a follow spot and a profile spot and a gauze and haze. So we need to teach that perhaps first. We need lists maybe of adjectives and adverbs. I use the phrase talk like a theatre critic, and that's been inspired from the Doug Lemov and David Didow sort of work around thoughts on talk and oracy. I use thought stems, and they're part of my talk like a theatre critic model. So I give ideas of what students could say with sentence starters, which are how they would talk like a theatre critic. Thinking about using think, pair, share to help them generate that vocabulary, and of course model that. So model your own opinions using that vocabulary that you want them to use. Then thinking about building up the response. So aim for verbal responses first. Just let's talk about what we've seen. Let's talk about our response. Then you can look at sentence starters and structure. We can develop that into paragraphs. You can slowly then start to remove those scaffolds. You can differentiate with then asking students to write more or still providing the scaffolds for students who need it. Then assess one paragraph as a piece of work. Then think about developing that into longer responses. writing a full theatre review. You could maybe establish that by this point you want that to be 1.5 to 2 sides of A4, for example. We've got Year 7s and Year 8s who can write 2 pages of A4 on a theatre production that they've seen. Then generate that towards writing full exam style responses. I would always encourage introducing exam questions early on, because you want the writing of the students to be specific, and I think it's important to early on introduce the ability to respond to a specific question and the words in the question. So think about introducing exam questions early on, but just encouraging 1-paragraph responses at first. I think it's useful, as I've said, to ensure that the writing always has a focus. And I think the earlier they can use that ability of using question words in an answer, the better. So think about some of these as strategies for building up responses in your students. How to revisit and revise then. So think about using productions, especially when we get to GCSE and A-level, that you can use more than once or watch more than once. Building quizzes, building low stakes testing. You can test knowledge on a theatre production that students have seen. Give them quotes to learn, quotes to remember. Can you remember 5 types of lighting? Can you remember the sound effect? Can you sketch the costume? Can you sketch the set from memory? So using recall and thinking about getting that production and those details into the long-term memory, especially if this is for GCSE or for A-level. If it is for GCSE or A-level and you watch something, say at the start of Year 10 or Year 12, keep revisiting that throughout the course. So think about using spaced or interleaved learning. So even if you move on to devised work and you're doing a big devised unit for 3 months, every so often revisit your live theatre productions, watch half an hour of it, do a low stakes quiz, set a homework task of writing a response. So keep that fresh throughout the course to improve success. Think about fun ways to revise. So if you've got the script, which will be brilliant, think about asking students to act out scenes from it, put their own production on of this play. That's obviously going to help them learn their lines, learn the quotes that they need. Or as just a fun game or a starter, ask students to act out a scene from memory. Or with their eyes closed, draw the set, or draw it on the board and students have to guess which scene it is. So, try to implement different ways of revising. Think about how your students can put their work on this theatre production that they've seen into the wider context of your school life. So can they make podcasts? Can they write reviews for your school website or school magazine? Can they engage in different ways with the production? Can you set up a debate in class? Could you use this as an oracy assessment? So trying to almost frame their learning in a real world context. If they could provide a theatre review of this production for parents and other teachers to read, which would genuinely maybe influence them to go and see this show, then their work has had this real life context applied to it, and that can be really, really powerful. So just thinking about ways that we can revisit, we can revise, we can make this learning more meaningful. So that's been a real whistle-stop tour in how I would introduce and teach live theatre as a topic, because it's one of my favourite things to teach. What I've just done here is a very simple and brief 6-lesson plan. So this could be a half-term plan for Key Stage 3. And so you might want to pause the video here and just have a look at this medium-term plan, which would just introduce live theatre. It builds up in terms of complexity and what's demanded from the students. And I've chosen here to focus on a different aspect of theatre each lesson. So these elements that I talked about at the start. So that's been my presentation for you for this Aspire Power of the Arts conference on how I would teach and introduce live theatre. I hope it's been useful and good luck with your teaching of live theatre. Thank you.